Hello, and welcome to 10 Very Big Books, a Malazan Readthrough podcast. My name is Peter Bond, and with me today is our producer. How are the levels looking, AJ Fileri?
The levels are looking great. They're looking better than ever. They're out of this world, if you can say.
Like space.
Yeah.
And he's back. He's returning to the show. He's my friend and the closest person I know to a Star Trek aficionado and expert. It's Nathan Quinn.
Hello. Thanks for having me back. Very excited to be back for Willful Child.
Hooray.
Did you want to, before we get talking Willful Child, did you want to offer any hot Star Trek takes about Picard, Lower Decks? Were you trying to stir
yeah,
stir
sure,
the pot?
Yeah. I can't remember what time frame we were doing the last one. I'm sure Discovery had been out for a while. I don't think Picard had come out yet. I love Picard. Picard was a great season of TV. And I got to tell you, I'm loving Lower Decks. Lower Decks is very funny. So if you guys have Star Trek fans who are listeners who have not yet checked out Lower Decks or Picard, you got to recommend from your boy Nathan.
Nice.
We should follow up with Steve about Picard. I think on our last interview, he mentioned it in some deeply disgusted manner.
He did bring it up in a derogatory way, yeah.
But it's one of those things where I know so little about it. I just don't think I'm the person to inquire further about his Star Trek, because I think it seems he has a lot of thoughts.
He definitely has thoughts about the new Star Trek
He wrote
stuff
several books
directly
about
in this book.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that brings us to today's book, Willful Child, The Wrath of Betty, Steven Erikson's follow-up to 2014's Willful Child, his satirical Star Trek novel. The book continues to follow Captain Hadrian Sawback and the crew of the Willful Child as they get into various episodes and troubles in space. So let's get started. And AJ,
yeah.
Let's kick it off. What did you think of Willful Child, Wrath of Betty?
I honestly really loved this book. I had a great time reading this book. I thought it was just a rip-roaring great time. Whereas the first one was a lot of Star Trek references that I definitely did not get. I feel like this one was more just like kind of a silly romp through space with some Star Trek references in it. Like the jokes per page in the last book, I feel, were like in the dozens. Like every page just had so many jokes in it that I wasn't getting. But this one felt like it definitely had more of a story. And even though they were doing similar like episodic things, like you said, Pete, in this book as they were doing in the first book, I found this one way easier to follow. And actually, I read this one under more duress than I read the first one, because this I read all in one day. The first one I read over 2 days and understood less. And Nathan is laughing at me because of my poor planning, and I will give him that. But also, this book didn't come in until Thursday, even though I ordered it a month ago. But you know, that wouldn't have changed my reading timeline at all, if I'm being completely honest with you.
So I just want to build off. We'll get to Nate next, I guess. I'm going to get to more of your thoughts, of course.
We invited him onto the podcast, whatever.
But I got to say, my opinion, better book, better than the first one.
Yeah.
Had a much better time.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. My memory of the first one's a little foggy, but I just enjoyed this one so much more, you know? And I don't know if it has to do, because there's definitely, I don't know, maybe less explicit Star Trek stuff. I don't know. But the thing is, I'm sure there's a bunch of references going over my head. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but I agree. And also some of the episodes were longer and kind of connected to it, you know? I suppose the first one I think had more episodes that were a little shorter. This one had several episodes that connected between chapters, which I enjoyed following the characters through a little bit of a journey. And by the end of the book, I would dare say I was invested in the characters' well-beings.
Yeah.
And I had concern for Captain Hadrian Sawback, which was not something I expected to be saying.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I believe we described him in the last book as not even an anti-hero. We described him as just like a shitty dude. Where in this one, I would describe him more as an anti-hero, I guess.
Yeah, totally. That's kind of what I was going on as well.
Yeah. We should touch on that eventually. But so, Nate, but to get to your kind of big picture thoughts, what you think of the book?
Yeah, 3 for 3. I think all three of us agree that this one's a fun read. Dare I even say a more fun read than the first one? Probably just because the first one has to do so much kind of laying the groundwork and prep work of justifying itself as a Star Trek satire. You know, setting up who the characters are and who the world is and kind of explaining what they're making fun of, what Steve's trying to reference and why this ought to exist. You know, in the first one, they're constantly joking about how the structure is episodic. In this one, they don't even joke about it. It's just fine that it is. It's accepted. They just move on to the next thing. So I think there's a lot of examples of that where it's just like, you can dig right into it. You can get past all of the setup and get right into having fun with it. It is a really fun book. And you're right. Captain is much more likable, much more easy to sympathize with. And you agree with a lot more of his decisions. I think that is a positive change from the first one. The first one was difficult to empathize with him for.
Yeah, there's a lot more of like Captain Kirk decision making. You know what I mean? Where it feels more like we are reading a book about Captain Kirk and less of like somebody who's trying to be Captain Kirk. In some ways, which I enjoy. Yeah. And also, I do want to just make the distinction. We keep saying episodes, but they do say in like the middle of chapter 1 or something, Hadrian says, "I like to think of them as parables."
I
calls every planet it's a parable planet.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah, it's very good.
Moving into chapter 2, he says something about maybe we could call this one Parable 2.
Right. Yeah. Very good stuff.
I haven't thought much about exactly what made Sawback kind of more approachable in this volume, but I guess I was thinking more about it, and I know we talked about this a bit last time, but I always appreciate reading this book because of seeing Erickson's writing kind of from a different perspective.
Yes.
And especially with, we're going to talk about it later, but Erickson does write about systems a lot and how corruption and I don't know, it's kind of a larger point. I really have to think about trying to articulate it better, but I often think about how Erickson's trying to define the individual versus a system and what's the relationship between those things, especially when a system is corrupt and broken and flawed, and then what is an individual's relationship to that system. So I think thinking about this book and how it is portraying Sawback versus these various systems he meets was just it's another interesting factoid in my thinking about this kind of Erickson odyssey.
Yeah,
this podcast is taking.
That's really interesting because I do think that comes up in the text where Sawback and Tammy are talking about why he's even bothering trying to right all these wrongs and everything in such a broken, corrupt system. And it seems like the argument is for doing every little bit you can to, by hook or by crook, pull society in the right direction. That like he happens to be a genius who knows what the right thing to do is, so it's his responsibility. It's like almost that noblesse oblige shit that is old-timey idea that if you are the one with the power to do something and therefore you must have the responsibility to do something. It's right. An interesting thing that I definitely picked up more in this one overtly. And from hearing what you guys talk about Malazan, it seems like this is a common thread that Erickson is interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not to dive too big into that, but I just wanted to note it, but maybe we'll talk about some of the individual episodes of this book. AJ, what's an episode that caught your eye?
I think the one...
Sorry. What's a parable that really taught you a valuable lesson?
Thank you. I think Hadrian 23:6. No, it's a Bible reference for all you Bible readers out there.
Look at the smart kid here.
I think the one that sticks with me the most, I believe, is when they travel 1,000 years into the future to the abandoned Wallycrap Mall.
Sure.
But I have issues with that chapter just because it does take up so much of the book.
Big chapter.
Big chapter. But I enjoy the payoff. I enjoy the... how it leads into their kind of final adventure to go get the krill so that the giant shrimp doesn't destroy Earth.
Yeah,
pretty good.
I don't know if you guys caught this, was a reference to Star Trek 4, the movie Star Trek 4, the one with the whales, of course.
Sure. I assumed it was a reference.
Yeah, I assumed it was a reference. Yeah, very good. But I think that was the one that stuck out most to me. And then the introduction of Beta, the sentient mannequin with perfect hair.
You guys probably caught that being a direct over reference to the Next Generation. Okay, because I know AJ, I don't think we've talked about it yet on this we have checked in with AJ's lack of Star Trek knowledge at all.
Yes,
so I wasn't sure how much you do.
So an update, I guess. Last time I hadn't seen any Star Trek. Right now, I've seen, and I should say, I've seen the new movies, but I don't really count that towards my Star Trek canon knowledge, really.
No, I don't think they
especially for the context of these books.
Yeah.
But so at time of recording, I have now seen the original Wrath of Khan, which we did talk about as our Patreon bonus for the month of October. If you want to get in on that,
yeah, check it out. But yeah, you were saying about the Wally Crap parable.
Yeah. So yeah, I just think the amount of time that it took up in the book, and then the stuff that at the end of it, really I think paid off the most for me. Like I did like the one where, well, I don't want to take up too many. So what were your thoughts, Pete?
Yeah, that was it was a large part of the story, and not all the parables are given even screen time for sure. Yeah, but I think it's interesting, especially since of course there's time travel, and then I know maybe Nate you'll be able to articulate this better than me, but I know part of the show and part of Star Trek is leaving the science fiction space setting to go to these other settings for like excursions, And then sometimes it's, the random planet, but sometimes it's the past or the future or like gangsters or something.
Yeah. On the Next Generation, they have the holodeck. Yeah, totally. There's lots of reasons for Star Trek to take a detour.
Yeah, especially then when we get into more later in the book, this is also part of it. I guess I was just thinking about, I was reading those sections being aware that I'm sure Steve was trying to evoke these types of not like just planetary excursions, but like temporal, or I almost want to use the word extracurricular. I don't know. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the kind of feeling that it seems like he's going for most of these, is the idea that on the way, he mentions it, I think specifically, on the way to whatever else they're doing, they're constantly being interrupted, which is kind of the idea with Star Trek, is there's always something going on. It may be a big universe, it may be a big galaxy, but there's always something catching the eye of the captain, or stopping them in their tracks, or interrupting them, or they go to a planet and there's always something going on. I think that is something that Steve really enjoys playing with, the idea that there's always something to do, and I think that Hadrian also has that quality, is finding something to do. I think that was especially obvious in the first book, but the second one, he needs to find fewer excuses to go on excursions, but he and Tammy still have the back and forth of like, okay, well, why are we doing this? Why bother? Why are you going down to the planet? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. I felt like Tammy took kind of a back seat in this book compared to, I feel like the last one had a lot of Tammy Sawback dialogue, where this one, I don't know, we were just doing less. We were doing different things.
Well, I feel like the through line in the first one was, what is Tammy's end goal? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
But now that storyline has kind of come to a close, Tammy is just another character on this ship.
Right.
Exactly.
If there was an overarching plot to the first one, which,
yeah.
Like this one, maybe there wasn't. It was about Tammy and finding out what the origin / purpose of Tammy was. And they kind of hinted at it again in this one. But mostly it's just kind of a framing device within which to have the adventures.
Right. Of course.
Right.
Nate, what's a parable episode that stood out to you this time?
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and I think my favorite, or at least the most memorable, most significant one, was one of the early ones where they go down to the planet that the other captain, the other affiliation captain, was stranded on, and he kind of takes over the I don't remember exactly what they're called, the kind of planet of dimwits versus the kind of planet of hippies.
Oh, right.
And it just reminding me that this book was published in 2016, which means it was probably written in 2015. But it seems like, from what I know, Steve Erickson kind of wrote it pretty quick as a lark, just to kind of get through stuff and as a fun side project in between his other bigger, huge things. Seems like that parable, he's really dealing with some Trump stuff, and that was fascinating to me, especially considering by that point Trump had not yet been elected. Yeah. It's kind of reconciling with the idea that a strong idiot is very attractive to some people, and why, and the idea that utopia, when it's coming to replace the thing that you already have, can seem like a scary thing. Mm-hmm. And it was an interesting take on that. I was really, I did not expect in a Willful Child novel to kind of get a perspective on a political situation in our modern day world that was slightly more nuanced than I was expecting. I was expecting, the classic jabs and goof 'em ups. But I do kind of get a new perspective on the idea that the kind of fear that comes with the idea that perhaps what other people are calling utopia is scary to you. So I thought that was fascinating. We can dig in more there if you want, but I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, Nate, I do definitely think that this parable came from a place of frustration on Steve's part, because he does talk about what you're talking about, is like the powerful idiot and the people that flock to that. But he also addresses the people, to put it in real life terms, the left and the right, the people, the I don't know what to call it, but like the people on the left who are just like, oh, well, we have to hear everybody out, and like it is our duty as people to try and understand other people's points of view, and like blah blah blah, and like the other side of that coin on that planet is like the people who just won't stop apologizing, or just like, oh, I'm really just trying to understand these racist Nazis, like that sentence is like literally said. It's like, oh, they, maybe if we try and understand each other, stuff will work out better. And it's just like, I don't know. Steve is coming at it from the point of like, no, it does not work like that.
Yeah. Well, and Steve also kind of plays it interestingly in that the peace loving hippies are also doing it at the end of a nuclear warhead. Like they have these nuclear warheads hanging over you. I have a quote here from that parable that might be illuminating. It's at the end of it, and Hadrian's kind of thinking about the consequences of how they're leaving the planet. He says, on the other hand, a planet full of mewling pro-education social justice warriors will, if left alone, establish a utopian model civilization with no conflict, no inequality, and no room at all for sociopathic billionaires sucking blood from the tits of the poor. And if that ever happened, why, it'd be canceled after 3 seasons. Which is...
That's the exact quote I had highlighted and was looking for, Nate.
Nice.
Same
because
hat.
That is a fun jab at Star Trek itself. The idea that, Star Trek, as imagined by Gene Roddenberry, was utopia. It's imagining the future as it could be if we let our better selves govern us. The idea of mixed race bridge crew and women and men being equals roughly on the bridge of the Enterprise, and all of that kind of stuff coming from Gene Roddenberry's brain, and then realizing that it's not the most popular idea with America or with the world as a whole. And it was canceled after 3 seasons. Well, really, it was canceled after 1 season and then barely picked up for 2 seasons more after that.
Right.
Probing random question, Nate. Is there any economic politics in Star Trek,
So in the original series, they don't go a ton into it, but it's established in The Next Generation that they are a post-monetary society. They are post-consumerism in that any material needs that they have are either so well taken care of that they have kind of gotten rid of the economical incentive for it, and that people who work do so because they have a calling and a need and a love for work. It's not for economic reasons. It's a really utopian thing that they don't delve into a ton, just a handful of episodes kind of deal with it.
That's a lot to unpack, honestly.
It really is. Well, I mean, right. You could, I'm sure
that
people
sounds like something for me on my own time.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure people have written entire, doctoral theses on the ideas of post-scarcity in Star Trek. It's wild. But that's the kind of utopia that they're reaching for, even if they don't bother explaining it, how we could get there.
So it's funny you mentioned consumerism.
Yeah, which, really. A favorite subject of Steve Erickson in this novel.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. I think if there was, we talked a bit about a Betty through line, and I guess we should talk about Betty eventually.
I guess.
But the wrath, but I would say probably the biggest through line in this book is actually about consumerism and a type of economic pressure and an economic system of exploitation. I would say this is maybe the primary preoccupation of the book.
Yeah, I mean, as evidenced through the Wally Crap parable.
Yeah, in the Wally Crap, in I think, oh my gosh, the names for the. What's it called? The Seahawk Zone. What's it called?
The Seahawk Country or whatever.
Seahawk Nation. Yeah.
Nation. Yeah.
With Seahawk Nation, it's littered throughout. It's wired through.
And the plog make a return from the first book. The plog collected now are the plog collectibles. Yeah.
So, and we can talk about that, of course. We probably should. But the reason I actually brought it up was because I think that's probably the primary theme throughout the book, you know. But I would say a strong secondary theme is there is a lot of time dedicated to talking about gender in this book, you know. And I don't always think it's like done in the most insightful or thoughtful way, but I was really here for it because we had this conversation when we talked about the first book where I think I was kind of caught off guard by the gender swap universe, you know, because ultimately for me, I felt like it kind of reinforced a gender binary I neither believe in or ascribe to, you know, and that's kind of what I was chafing against. But I think and of course we return to this universe in a big way in this book, you know, and what I appreciated about it so much more was not only were we talking about gender much more there, but then when we talk about all the mannequin stuff, it's just a bigger part of that storyline. And I would say maybe the secondary theme of this novel. So I appreciated that theme. And I think the gender swap story in this one was surprisingly easily my favorite episode of the whole book.
And it's interesting how in the Wally Crap parable, all of the androids and everything, all of that consumerism and gender stuff play off of each other. That kind of is both there together. All of that masculine, feminine stuff that they're going into with all of these androids, which are kind of stuck in the loop of Wally Crap commercials, playing off the kind of stereotypes of a hyper masculine.
He's writing about the performance of gender as also an economic and a commercial performance, which I thought was a great lens to talk about it through, and a really pertinent one since financial ways we express gender is a whole thing. So
and it's being reinforced.
Just really excited for it's a huge part of the reinforcement, and I just thought it was a surprising through line, and we actually had received some email about that from the first time, kind of letting us know that it was going to be a bigger part of this book. But I was totally caught off guard in a way. So I don't know. I think that was a real treat for me.
Yeah, I agree. It was still, like you say, there was some complicated stuff. I don't want to skip over the Bonobo verse, which
I mean, it's a whole thing.
Which if you aren't reading along, was just a quick detour into a mirror universe that what if humanity had evolved from bonobos instead of chimps, or our common, what was it, the common ancestor were bonobos instead of chimps, which I think the idea was that the bonobos are a
matriarchal
social construct that commoditizes sexual favors and sex acts as social favors and stuff. And it was a little gross. I mean, it was kind of a little, I don't know, not fully gross, I guess. It was just a little cringy to think, well, what if the world was like this? And I guess Hadrian's existence in that world was better this time than it was the last time. I feel like in the first book, Hadrian was constantly looking for ways to kind of get into those situations, whereas in this book, Hadrian feels like he is trying to do something and ending up in those situations, which I know is a subtle difference, but it felt weird to explore that kind of uncomfortable sexuality space in a thing that I guess is kind of indicative of, or not indicative, an exemplar of the way Star Trek the original series often ended up in weird, sexy spots that maybe aren't fully appropriate for what, utopian society science fiction show ought to be doing. But I guess that's the way you get renewed for 3 seasons, if you get renewed at all, is playing to your teenage base. But man, it just, sometimes it felt strange and a little bit uncomfortable to play in that space.
Yeah, I think he was Hadrian was way more reticent to get into those situations, but not in a way where he didn't still want them. It was still just like, oh, well, I have to do this first, but once this is done, then we can come back to this, which so he didn't really change a whole lot, but I do think it was more palatable in this way. Yeah.
Yeah. There's that moment, I guess, at the end of the Bonobo verse thing. And sorry, Peter, it's the only moment where Hadrian seems to give up in the entire book, or since we've known Hadrian. And granted, I think he's giving up because he's counting on his mirror universe counterpart Hadriana to solve the problem. But he gives up because he believes...
He gives up 100%.
He fully gives up because he believes that his situation in command of the Bonoboverse crew.
The woeful
child.
Yeah, the woeful child. That they could not possibly solve this situation with the tools and resources they have, which is not a very Kirk thing to think. And it's not, I didn't think it was a very Hadrian thing to think. Like I said, it's the first time we see him give up. And when he gives up, he sits down in the captain's chair and asks for a hand job.
Well, yeah. The whole time Sindauer's been trying to give him a hand job, to be fair, I guess.
He accepts a hand job.
Yeah.
I'll agree. I mean, listen, I don't want my initial comments to be misconstrued because I'm enthusiastic, but I do agree, Nate. I think sometimes, as I said in our Wrath of Khan episode, there can be a kind of sex farce element to this, to these books that I think can kind of add to a kind of, can reinforce a gender politics dynamics that I don't agree with, you know? Or just kind of weird situations that leave me not enjoying the book as a reader, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and that's the kind of complex stuff that Star Trek, the original series, was grappling with in itself. Like, at the same time that they were having, quote-unquote, women in positions of power, which really was just Uhura being on the bridge as an officer. Not a ton of equality there. But we're reaching for these kind of gender equality. They were also making Kirk have these kind of rendezvous almost every week with different women from different planets, just like as a romance of the week kind of thing. It's kind of grappling with both ideas that both simultaneously you can be striving for equality, but also be kind of regressive and reinforcing it as well. I think that's it's kind of, I guess, what is being explored here. It's kind of a weird quagmire to be in.
It is a bit of a quagmire, but I at least appreciated more that I felt like the book was definitely more directly engaged with these issues than the last one was, where I felt like a lot of the times this stuff was just being played for laughs, and then there was some. So I guess I just wanted to note I was more enthusiastic about that.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it's a lot more responsible this time of kind of trying to break that down in a more analytical way. So to
kind of move on, we haven't talked about Betty yet.
Well,
in Wrath of Betty, the interesting thing in this book, one of the most interesting things, is that we get introduced to Betty in the prologue, and then we don't see them for 200 pages, or more.
And you get introduced and you're like, well, it's the Wrath of Betty. This is going to be a big thing.
Right. Clearly, this is going to be the through line. Yeah.
They immediately surrender. It's great. I do also, I before we get to that final scene, I guess, I do just want to address the names in this book are all over the place. They're so good and just so ridiculous. There are.
Yeah. Do we want to run through a few?
Yes, please. Just there are several moments where we get the views of bridges on other ships for like half a page or something, and we get introduced to the entire crew of these ridiculously named people. Yeah, Nate, give me some.
Yeah, so Sunenugian Betty is a direct Sunenugian, I guess is how I'd pronounce that. Is a direct reference to Khan Noonien Singh is Khan's full name.
Right.
Just making something slightly overcomplicated and then never using it again. Of the KFC We Surrender is a fun. The ship names are great. We get Captain Hans Olo of the AFS Century Warbler.
Holy shit, I didn't even put it together.
Are you serious?
Love that.
Oh my God.
And the three of us are probably much bigger Star Wars fans than any of us are Star Trek fans. I certainly am. So that's I'm surprised.
Well, you're a good fan of both, Nate.
Yeah.
Let's not.
I just will I will stipulate to the fact that I am a bigger Star Wars fan. I am currently game mastering a Star Wars role playing game. So I'm surprised that one slipped by you, Pete. Let's see. We've got Janice Reasonable and Frank Worship and Commandant Einstein Prim, Lieutenant Commander Rand Humble Knot. A lot of good names.
Humble Knot is a real Malazan name, if you ask me. Yeah. That's right. Told the Hound's Hive, what's up? Oh my God. Anyway.
The temporal agents have some fun names. Tug Nutter, Clitter Sob.
Yeah.
I think it's very purposeful about the language in there, and I especially like how he kind of spoofs the science fiction trope of having fake technology named somewhat complicated stuff.
Right.
Because every time the fake technology comes up, Steve puts in a word, like a paragraph of completely unintelligible words.
There's a whole, it's like a page and a half of Olo and Humble going back and forth of like, oh, well, I'm going to do the neurographnomizer, and then they just keep going back and forth. It was like, but if you do that, then this will, and it's just like, oh my God, it's a
classic bit of just inventing some nonsense. And this is a common story from Star Trek actors of having to say jargon in a completely, serious smooth way. And even serious tone, as if they know exactly what the fuck they're talking about, when really it's just made up bullshit that they're just parroting back and forth to each other. And they might, like you say, go full paragraphs without knowing what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah.
Do you have one? Do you have a quote?
I do have. I have the section I was talking
Hell
about.
Yes.
I won't read the whole thing because it is literally a page and a half. Olo says he wants to do something, and Humble says that's a bad idea. And so Han Solo says, I am well aware that initiating the proximity activation sequence cascade effect of the hidden displacement nodes could trigger a quantum defibrillation of the dark energy lattice matrix, instigating a full feedback ripple effect through the postulate realities, both above and below the fixed reality 1A spectrum. At the same time, are we not intrinsically committed to reality 1A spectrum by virtue of quantum adherence to the origin point reality manifestation, thus ensuring a reset threshold at some initiation point in the temporal multiverse index?
The kind of off jokes that they're playing diplomacy.
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm really proud of myself. I didn't stumble at all.
That was really impressive, AJ. I will give AJ a couple snaps. That is a really impressive reading of some nonsense bullshit.
Yeah, there's 2 other paragraphs of that exact thing. It's so good.
Very funny. Sorry, Pete, what were you saying?
I was just saying I kind of liked that diplomacy makes a cameo.
Dude,
yes. Oh my God. That was so good. First they're playing
Risk, and then they move on to diplomacy, which is a much more deadly, corrosive interaction. So funny.
Yeah.
And when Sawback hears that they're playing diplomacy, he tells them to send a medic down. Like, oh, well, they have the Marine medic. It's like, well, not for long.
Yeah. Have you guys played diplomacy?
I have not. I have not played it.
I actually never have, bro.
It's like really hard to get, right?
This is a crazy story. I took a class in college that
it's too crazy. We can't put it on the airwaves.
It's just crazy that this happened at all. Not that it's a wild story. It's just that I took a class called Grand Strategy, and it was like an honors elective class that was like in the history department, I think. And I was like, oh, it seems like if I wanted to get some history credits, it seems like an interesting one. We'll read a bunch of Julius Caesar stuff, like campaign, reading about, and maybe this won't even make it to the pod, but we read a bunch of old stuff, talked about the idea of grand strategy and how war has progressed throughout the ages. But in the first fucking session of that class, the professor just had us split into groups and play diplomacy.
Oh my God.
Just to introduce us to the idea of realpolitik. And it's just so fucking weird that was a thing that happened in this college course that I paid to be in.
Yeah.
Sounds like a fucking bit, bro.
It was a bit. It was a stunt. And
that's
we, got 2 turns in because the whole thing about diplomacy is everybody gets to take as long as they want.
Right. Yeah, 2 turns in 3 hours or whatever.
Exactly.
Ugh.
Well, I don't know where we take the podcast.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. So they play diplomacy, and I just love that the Marines are once again some of the funnest parts of this book. They're just showing up when they're absolutely
so glad
needed.
They came back,
and when they're not needed, there off in the wardroom playing board games and murdering each other.
Oh, extremely, extremely good stuff. So. Was there any other parables you guys wanted to talk about before we get to kind of the final climax, I guess you could call it?
Let's Betty it up.
Yeah. So after, well, actually, did we want to talk about the Comic-Con part at all? Because the Comic-Con part was pretty good.
Yeah. And that was the point at which I reached in this book. I was like, hey, guys, I'm like 3/4 of the way through this book, and so far, no Wrath of Khan. Are you sure we want to watch Wrath of Khan for your bonus episode?
Right.
Maybe we should be watching Star Trek 4, I think it's called The Voyage Home. Is that what it is? Where they go back
to a Star Trek convention?
So, well, not quite, but they go back in time to San Francisco in the late 1980s, and their disguises are, they pick out disguises that are time period period, and Spock wears a fucking karate headband to cover his ears, his pointy ears. God. It's just like the idea of blending in by sticking out but that the whole idea that they're going back in time for the whales, they have to abduct a whale from 20th century Earth and bring it back to the future. It's a whole thing.
I also really enjoyed the back time travel plot line, or epic parable. But like, I just thought it was very goofy, so I had a good time.
That whole movie is a lot of that kind of interacting with people of the present day and convincing them, no, this is normal. This is not a gun. Yeah. This is a prop or whatever.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And I guess for those of you not reading along, they go back to the year 2015 to Seattle Comic-Con, pretty much.
Yeah.
And then ultimately,
Seahawk Nation, as they call
Seahawk Nation, as they call it.
Seahawk Nation, baby.
Ultimately, Hadrian gets mistaken for a Chris Pine stand-in.
Yeah, they just call him Mr. Pine. Yeah. Stand-in for Mr. Pine.
For the, I guess, presumed Star Trek panel. At Comic-Con. Oh man, it's good. It's so good.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys probably didn't catch this. The person that had canceled that they were excited to have him fill in for was Miss Ryan. They were all excited for Miss Ryan. That would be Jerry Ryan, who's the actress who played Seven of Nine on Star Trek Voyager, who is notoriously she's a fan favorite. I guess maybe not notoriously is the word, because it has nothing to do with her. She's a fan favorite mostly because she was in a tight catsuit for most of that show. It's definitely some gross fan stuff.
That makes all the mannequins' names being blank of blank so much better.
Yeah,
the one mannequin's name is 6 of 9. I was like, okay.
Yeah, there's Sally 6 of 9. Yeah, Sally 6 of 9 is a very direct reference to that.
I never got that. I just thought it was a 69 joke.
Yeah, me too.
That's funny.
Very good.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that whole Comic-Con stuff was very funny. It just and dealing with the cops and
I gotta say though, it's kind of funny that I'm gonna say this because it's like, of course it's in this book, but I just didn't know we were gonna go to that level of meta.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I was expecting Steve to walk out of a cafe or something in the background.
Right,
and be like, hello,
pretty
my
much
name's
Steve could have showed up into the book pretty soon and it would be pretty credulous as it is fitting the tone. Do you know what I mean? So I was almost surprised in that section, to be candid.
Yeah. And I do love that the resolution to that whole, we need to get krill, but the Pacific Ocean is too radioactive to actually get krill out of. And Hadrian uses the knowledge of his grandfather collecting old shit. There's like, sea monkeys are a thing. We can just add water and put that in the ocean, and that'll stop the giant shrimp in the future from destroying the Earth. Really good.
Fucking wild.
Yeah.
Oh, another good part of that was about when all the temporal agents were fumbling and falling over themselves. Yeah. Which I don't think is a direct reference to anything Star Trek, but just generally, whenever there's time travel shit, it's like, okay, sometimes Star Trek pretends that there's like a division in charge of time travel shit, and sometimes it just doesn't care. Especially in the later stuff, like Star Trek Enterprise really has a whole division where they're talking about time travel, like police, basically, just making sure that you don't fuck shit up. And it's very silly, and it just doubles down on that whole concept of going back in time to fix a thing that you showing up is the cause of its breaking, and then somebody else has to come back in time to fix the thing that you broke.
In this case, it's all the Garys showing up to make sure that pigeon shits on that kid's head so that he hates humanity or something.
Right, so that he can take over the country or whatever. Yeah, it's fucking wild.
All the Garys. And then all the Garys show up in different ships and destroy each other. It's very good.
Right. In orbit above 2015 Earth is just a bunch of temporal agents and ships murdering each other.
The same temporal agents destroying the same ships. Very good.
Yes, time travel is a big element, but I'm on the Wikipedia page of 7 of 9, and here just wanted to let me know, in 2019, she was ranked the 4th sexiest Star Trek character by the Sci-Fi Channel.
Oh my god.
Which is to say, like, what's going on, Sci-Fi? Wait, are you doing okay? What are we doing?
It is crazy that Sci-Fi ranked them all at all.
Why are we doing this on our website?
I'm not sure who she's 4th behind, though.
Okay, I don't know what to tell you on that, Nate, but bring it up with Sci-Fi, because I guess this is something we're doing on the internet
strange.
now.
It's just strange.
Number 4, 7 of 9, Number 3, Kirk. Listen, I gotta say...
What?
No,
Rigged.
dude, I gotta say, Kirk was hot. Watch Wrath of Khan. It's in the tape, you know.
Check out
Fucking goddamn
Kirstie Alley's Twitter.
We jumped into the future because we just had a 10-minute conversation that got cut out of the podcast. So we're putting this train back on the rails, and we're talking about Willful Child, The Wrath of Betty.
To reintroduce the podcast for ourselves.
Yeah, really.
So that's to say, AJ,
Sure.
what did you make of the Betty finale and the Betty of it all? Let's kind of wrap up the episode with this.
So, this whole finale I thought was just pretty goofy. I really honestly don't really have much to say about it. Like it was goofy. It was funny to read. And then Hans Olo comes in, does some stuff, and then gets not framed, but basically is going to be the reason that the Clang attack, I imagine, in the next book at some point.
Yeah, so they set the whole Clang conflict up. Actually, why don't I pull up a quote here that explains it?
Yeah,
the Clang's whole strategy is, I guess, to surrender to the affiliation and then dominate them economically from within.
Right.
So getting the affiliation to accept Clang surrender, thus opening the way for economic sabotage on a grand scale as we entice short-sighted human corporate CEOs and their idiot shareholders into buying into the profit bottom line bullshit by accepting cheap off-world labor in appalling working conditions, thus undermining the economic clout and purchasing power of their own middle class, leading to increased unemployment and a burgeoning poverty rate, while the same CEOs hide behind walls made of money and tell each other how brilliant they are.
I gotta say, I think if you were a large corporation reading this book, you'd probably get bad vibes.
You're like, wow, Steve, do you not like me?
Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
I don't think the Walton family is probably appreciating this book.
Yeah, really. Between this and Wally crap, I don't think they're feeling very warm and fuzzy.
Right.
And I gotta tell you, I think this satirical novel from Steve's probably the biggest thing on the Walton family radar. So. I agree mostly with you. I don't have. If anything, I know we talked a bit about this in our Wrath of Khan episode. I definitely almost thought there would be more Khan related parody with the Betty stuff. Yeah, but it was pretty light in a way. Spark. There's that.
Yes. Right. That moment where now with the context of Khan, knowing that like it's this whole grand sacrifice from Spock to go into this radiation filled room, and in the book somebody was just playing fetch with Spark and accidentally threw it through a cracked door into the radiation room, which
it turns out Tammy left cracked on purpose to try and kill Spark.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And then it immediately has no consequences because they are able to shunt the radiation into a closet. They're able, and then Hadrian's able to reset Spark with no consequences. Just shove his hand up his butt and find his reset button, and no consequences at all. Because, as I mentioned,
which is fitting, of course,
the next movie, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, obviously implies that Spock is still alive. So,
plus, it's pretty heavily implied in the second film, in Wrath of Khan, if you ask me.
Yeah, they fully just show.
Oh yeah, because the coffin shows
up
on the woods of the Genesis planet. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually don't know. That might have been added later. I don't know. Maybe that was there the whole time. But I guess it
plus
was...
Kirk is like, life comes from death. I'm gonna have to return to this planet.
Yeah.
And then just
right.
after, I mean,
God,
it's laying on pretty thick there, William.
Yeah. Sorry, we should have said this in the Wrath of Khan episode, but I'll say it in this regular episode to tease you for the Wrath of Khan Patreon episode if you want to donate to our Patreon. The final line that Kirk has is, "Kirk, how do you feel?" And he just says, "Young." And that's the end of the film.
Yeah, well, right, because they spend the entire film talking about how he feels old, and he's getting old. Admiral Kirk is 52.
52. Life's over. He needs reading glasses.
Yeah. So that's just a taste of what you can get if you donate to our Patreon, patreon.com/10.
Way. Let's have some closing thoughts. This podcast has gone out of control, Nate.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going first. Screw it.
Go for it.
as I said up top, I enjoyed this read much more than the first one, I think. And I think some way, as you're saying, Nate, just the setup was all out of the way, and I feel like I just could appreciate individual parables and just kind of the lark of it all, you know. And I kind of knew what I was getting to.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I opened up this book and what I thought it would be is pretty much what it was, you know? There was stuff I was surprised by, but I just knew, I don't know, I knew the area Steve was playing with. So, had a good time, and I'm guessing we'll probably read the third one for the show, and it'll probably be I'm going to guess, a pretty fine time, too. Yeah. AJ, closing thoughts on the book?
I agree with you. I had a great time reading the book. I am looking forward to reading the third one eventually. I don't have much more to say about it, really. I feel like we've kind of covered all the bases. Yeah. Just a much more enjoyable read all around. Way easier to follow for me as well, but I think Nate said earlier, I think it's just by virtue of not having to do all the setup and that. But I also do think that this book was a way less of just like Star Trek gaffes the whole time and more of like kind of an actual story. So.
Yeah, I think that all the goofs and references to Star Trek are a lot less overt, and when they show up, they're just kind of, they just slide by, like that 7 of 9 reference that we talked about, or was that cut out? Well, you decide.
I think that might have been one of the final things that made it in before we got off track.
Nice. Well, I'll leave that to you, AJ, to figure out and sort out in the edit. The kind of stuff that just slides right by if you're not in the know, but you notice. There's more of that this time than in the previous book, which it seemed like you could tell this is a Star Trek reference. Like, whole parables were Star Trek references. The premise and you guys were noticing, oh, this is something Star Trek. I don't really follow it, but I'm along for the ride, I guess. Yeah. These were much lower stakes. You didn't really have as much of a barrier to entry. And I really liked how much they Steve rounded off the kind of sharp corners and edges of Hadrian Sawback. Because it really is difficult to I mean, I know kind of this is part of the stunt of the 10 very big books, is that the characters are sometimes not always the best to follow. The ones that you follow are kind of anti-heroes? ? Are they even heroes that are...
Many different types of characters
in
the world.
But it is sometimes exhausting to follow a shitty person. So rounding off some of those sharp edges really does help this second book and make it more fun to follow Sawback's exploits. I do have a closing quote here that kind of takes a burn at you guys, if you guys want to allow me.
Fucking close it out and burn us, bro. Yeah. Thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah.
We're gonna have the rest of the off season. And if you peace, love, and trees.
Yeah. If you
close the show, Nate.
If you want to hear us talk about Wrath of Khan, that's our Patreon bonus for this month. You can get all of our Patreon bonuses by donating just $1.
Tweet us and Gmail us, and
all right, Nate, bring us out.
So,
thanks, Nate, for coming on the show.
Absolutely, thanks for having me back. And anyway, here's a quote from as they're leaving the Comic-Con. We've got to go now, scheduling and all that. Interviews, poo casts, fat book, twit feed, the works. It never ends.
It never ends, bro. I gotta keep making these poo casts.
Gotta keep going with the poo casts. All right, everyone. Peace out.
See you.